Hey, how you doing? Scotty from Scott's Bass Lessons again. And a few weeks ago, I released a lesson. I recorded a lesson just from my friend's house. Actually, it's Jeff. It's not just my friend. It's the community manager of the SBL Academy. So I was around his house, and we just, we were talking about something. We were jamming actually, and we just thought, hey, let's, record this, get this down on camera. And show the SBL posse what we've been doing, and in that lesson, or the email I sent out to my subscribers, I said, do you want more of these off the cuff lessons? And everybody was like, it was actually an overwhelming yes. So I'm at Jeff's place again. We've been talking about what happened, that last lesson that we did, it's a couple of lessons ago, and just thought we had so many questions about the specific groove I played in that lesson that I thought I'd show you the specific groove because we had so many questions about it. But not only that, I had a lot of questions, and this again in the SBL Academy, we have questions all the time about exactly what I'm thinking when I'm playing, and I'm thinking about, I have got a specific mental pattern going on when I'm playing, and I'm going to talk about that. Like exactly what I'm thinking when I'm playing. I think it's one of the most interesting things and questions there is out there, and it's something I asked a lot of people about as well when I was coming up through the ranks. So first of all, let's check out the groove that we're going to be looking at, and then let's get into the meat of it. So that is the groove that we're going to be looking. Well, that's the groove that I played a few weeks ago, or something like it anyway. And that's the groove that we're going to be dissecting today. But first of all, if you haven't been to my website yet, ScottsBassLessons.com, please go check that out straight after this lesson. There's something like 40 or 50 hours of HD video lessons on there, and they're all free. So you can go check them out. But also I've got these really cool subscriber only goodies as well. Like a video about what you should be thinking about when you're buying a bass. I do an interview in there. There's an entire play along library, and all that stuff's free. You just got to sign up and become a subscriber to the site, and I will send you all the goodies. So make sure you go over to ScottsBassLessons.com after this lesson and check those out. So back to this groove. The first thing I want to talk about is what I'm thinking when I'm playing a groove like that, because you can think about scales. This is what the question, right? Am I thinking scales? Am I thinking chord tones, arpeggios? What is going through my brain when I'm playing a groove like that? And what's going through my brain when I'm playing pretty much everything that that I play on the bass? And the answer is a combination of stuff. But it's the order of this stuff that really is important. So, for instance, I and many other bass players, we think of chord tones as the foundational part of the bass line. Now, when I'm playing a groove like that, this, and actually, just to rewind a bit, this is over a C7 dominant groove, okay? And that means that the rest of the band will be playing a C dominant 7 chord. And the C dominant 7 arpeggio, and all an arpeggio is a chord broken up into notes played one by one, okay? So if the guitar player played a C7 chord one note at a time, he'd be playing a C7 arpeggio, right? So the notes are C, which is the root note, E, which is the third, G, which is the fifth, B flat, which is the flat 7, which is why it has that, you know, that sound, you know, and then the root again. So, and I really recommend, you know, getting these arpeggios / chord tones, because they're the same thing. I'll talk about that in 1 minute. Really get them down over your entire neck, and I have got lessons on Scott's Bass Lessons that talk specifically about how to learn arpeggios over the entire fingerboard. So make sure you check that out after this lesson. So what am I thinking? Well, what I'm thinking is chord tones. I'm thinking arpeggio notes. That's the foundational level of when I'm playing. Beneath that is rhythm. I'm thinking rhythm first. But then the next port of call is what notes I'm using. And I'm just using the notes from the chord. So, and I like to describe this as, you know, what does a guitar player do when he's playing in a band? You know, 90% of the time. Sometimes 80% of the time, but you know, 90% of the time, maybe more than 90% of the time. He just plays chords, right? That's what he does. He just strums his chords. What does a keyboard player or a piano player do when they're comping in a band? You know, what do? They just play chords. What does the bass player do? What does the bass player do? We just play chords. Same as the other guys. And that's the key to it. We just play chords. But we don't play chords like this. Or we could do, but that's not what the rest of the band want us to play. They want a bass line. So what do we build our bass line from? We build them from the chords. So instead of playing the chords where we play all the notes at once, we just play them one note at a time. Which is what an arpeggio is. And people also call these the chord tones. Chord tones just means you're not playing them in any specific order. An arpeggio generally, you know, ascends and then descends. Where a chord tones, I can play the arpeggio notes, but in any order. Okay, so they are the arpeggio notes, but people get confused. They're just chord tones, right? So that's what I'm thinking. That's the meat of my bass lines, and 99.99999% of bass lines you will have heard. That's what's going on. They're just playing the chord tones, okay? There is other notes that are thrown in the mix, and this can be a combination of scales and a combination of chromatic approach notes, which this bass line, you know, there's a few chromatic approach notes. One of them, which is a real, I use all the time, and you'll hear it in almost any bass line I play, because I'm just addicted to that sharp 5. I'll talk about that in a minute. But that's what's going on. They're either using scale notes or chromatic type approach notes. And if you listen to guys like the Motown guys, like James Jamerson, Bob Babbitt, those guys, most of it was just chord tones and a lot of chromatic approach notes, which is why those bass lines have that flavour. But even if you take something like, you know, it's just 1 to 4, chord 1 to 4, but with a chromatic note in it. So even riffs like Metallica's tunes are just using, you know, the same information. We've only got 12 notes, you know, it's all the same information. So people do get confused and think that that they can't use this in whichever genre of music that they're into, but you can. It applies to everything. Okay, so when I'm playing bass, I'm just thinking about chord tones, and then on top of that I'm applying chromatic notes and scales. And you should do this when you're practicing bass. You should really, you know, think about, okay, how do people play bass? The rhythm is really important, obviously. Then the foundation of the bass line is built from chord tones. same as the guitar player and the keys player. We're just playing the same stuff. And then the notes, the fill-in notes, are scales and chromatic tones. But you've got to, if you think about it like a house, the foundation of the house has to be solid before you build on top of it. So you need a really good knowledge of the arpeggios and chord tones of all the chords before you can really sort of move on, to the scales and the chromatic notes. And I tell my students that if you're not working on your chord tones or arpeggios, same thing, if you're not working on these, it's like a guitar player not being able to play the chords. Bass is relatively easy to get started on, right? Because you just... people think, yeah, bass is easier than guitar. It is not. It's hard. It's hard. In fact, to really, to represent these, the chords over the entire neck is really, really tricky. And that's the difference between somebody that's just playing bass on a very not a shallow level, but just starting out, and then somebody that's really proficient. They'll be able to represent the chords over the entire neck. So now I've got that out of the way, let's look at the riff that I want to take you through and exactly what the chord tones are and how it's working. So when you're learning any riff like this, I really recommend breaking it down into sections. Okay, so don't try and play the entire thing. Just let's look at the first bit and then move on to the second bit. Let's look for an obvious parts where we can put that break in. So that's that's an obvious break to me, and all I'm playing here is the root, the octave, and the flat 7. Now I am putting a ghost note in there, which is one of these dead note type things, but I'm going to come to that in a bit. So, and then we've got fifth, and then when it goes to the root again, it kind of starts again. Okay, so 2, 3, 4. And that is just if going from the flat 7 to the 13 or the 6th. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but it's actually the 13th of the chord. I'm not going to get into that now because I don't want this lesson to be half an hour long. But just know that you're going to, that A is the 13th of the C7 chord. Okay, so boom. Now here, this is something I use all the time. It's a chromatic sliding note. Remember I said that most bass lines are made from the chord tones, and then you apply scales and chromatic notes to the chord tones to get the full picture. That's what I'm talking about right here. I've got it's the sharp 5 of C, but you don't have to even think about it like that. It's just a semitone above into the 5th of C7. So let's just go around that first section. Boom. Yeah, let's just repeat that. Just repeat that round. It's a cool bass line on its own. Okay, now the next bit, it's what's called an enclosure, but an enclosure, it's an enclosure of a chord tone, and the chord tone that we're aiming for is the major third of the C. Remember I took you through that, that C7. I'm going to play a semitone either side of that third. This happens a lot in jazz actually, but it's a great thing to get in with your bass lines. So let's hear that in context with the bass line. 2, 3, 4. third, and we're, you know, just playing a semitone either side, so an F, an E flat, and then landing on the E, which is the third. These, you know, are arguably one of them is and one of them isn't in the actual chord, but they work because we're just, you know, aiming for that third. I could do it on the fifth, and on the seven, and on the root. It'd all be cool. It'd all work. But this time we're using it on the third. So let's repeat that a few times around so you can hear that. 2, 3, 4. 3, 4. 3, 4. 3, 4. Last time. Now, if you can't make that speed, that is totally cool. Just try and play it really slow, but it's the repeating round that's going to really help you. So it'd be like boom, 3, 4. Last time. So the next bit after that is this kind of bluesy thing, and it's something that a ton of guitar players play. And it's kind of from that bluesy type sound, but it's got the natural 13 in there as well. Okay, so let me just put that in the riff, and then we'll loop it around. So 2, 3, 4. It goes beep ba ba. So it's that little enclosure beep ba ba, and then it plays that, you know, again chord tone beep ba be to that flat 7, and then does this. Now the way I think about it is it's just this shape. It's just that move down chromatic step. And I sometimes, you know, I sometimes slide it up to that major third right at the last minute. And there, I'm just playing C, B flat, E flat, C. So, so you can practice that just around and round, just to get it under your fingers. 2, 3, 4. I'm actually pulling off there. Slowly. So there we've got boom. And that bit there, just the B flat, B, they're just octaves moving up to the C. I think I hammer onto that B flat, boom, 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 boom. That's it. So you play the lower octave, the B flat, then the high B flat, then the high B, and then the low B, and then the C. But I'm essentially just thinking it's a chromatic run into the C. And at the start of this lesson, I sometimes went, you know, and these notes aren't in the chord, but they're just working because they're a chromatic move into the C. There's B flat, 5th, root, 5th, B, and then C. So let's do that again. 2, 3, 4. these are created by, when I'm playing, my fingers are generally always in contact with the strings. And by just raising the fingers off the fingerboard, but not the strings, you get the chance to create these dead notes. Now, what I'd recommend doing is try and playing the riff without the dead notes to start with, okay? So something like, let's see if I can do this. Boom, biddy, boom, 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 biddy, da, boom. Okay, that's it without the dead notes. Once more. Once more, because I messed up that time. Now with the dead notes. You know, and I'm getting them from all over the place. The dead note thing, I've got tutorials on Scott's Bass Lessons about how to get ghost notes. You can get them from on the string you're playing. You can get them from the note above or the note below. So you can get them from a ton of different places, and I really recommend just checking that tutorial out on Scott's Bass Lessons. Go to the technique section. Remember, it's all free. The technique section, and then check out the ghost note exercises on there. But also just sit with this riff. Try and play it before you start adding the ghost notes, just with no ghost notes, and then try and add it in afterwards. So hopefully from watching this tutorial, 1, you've learned this groove. 2, you understand a little bit about how I think about the lines that I create, and 3, just, you know, how the chromatic notes and the scales can still be used, but like icing on the cake, you know, the chord tones are there as the sort of foundational part, and then you're laying them on top. So hopefully I want you to come away from this lesson and think, I really want to work on my chord tones, and or when I'm transcribing, when you're learning other people's bass lines, looking at how they're using the chord tones as well, and looking at that first, and then looking for the scale notes and the chromatic notes on top of that. So hopefully you've really enjoyed this lesson. If you had, I would absolutely love you if you click like below. And other than that, get over to ScottsBassLessons.com, check it out. There's tons of free bass lessons on there, but also make sure you subscribe as well, because then I can send you the really cool goodies. Other than that, take it easy, and I'll see you in the shed.